The message came through at 8:30 on a Thursday morning, right as the first snow began to fall outside my apartment window in Portland. I was pouring coffee, still half asleep, when my phone buzzed against the counter. The notification previewed only one line. "We already decided, Julia. You're not joining Christmas this year." I blinked twice, sure I had misread. But the words stayed, cold, final, like someone shutting a door quietly but firmly. I stared at the screen, the steam from my mug curling upward, blurring the reflection of my face. My thumb hovered above the keyboard, searching for something to say, some explanation that would make it make sense. Nothing came. The coffee in my hand went cold before I even took a sip. I had always believed Christmas was about family, even when family felt more like an obligation than warmth. For years, I'd been the one booking venues, ordering food, covering deposits. I was the one who made sure the table looked perfect and the wine never ran out. The Bennett Christmas party wasn't just a family tradition. It was my production, every detail planned and paid for with quiet precision. Last year, it had cost me nearly $60,000. $60,000 for laughter that never really included me. I set the phone down on the counter, the screen still glowing with that one cruel sentence. Maybe it was a joke, I told myself. Maybe Sophie meant it as sarcasm. But even as I tried to soften it, I could hear her voice in my head, light dismissive, always sure she was right. We already decided. They must have had a conversation, a vote maybe, without me. I opened our group chat, Bennett Holidays. Or at least it used to be called that. Now it read Real Christmas Crew. I wasn't in it. A small, sharp laugh escaped my throat. Real Christmas Crew. As if I had been some kind of artificial decoration they'd decided to throw away this year. I scrolled through my texts, checking for anything that might explain it, but the silence stretched too long. Finally, I tried calling my mother. It rang twice before going to voicemail. Her voice, polished and careful as ever, filled the line. "This is Margaret Bennett. I can't take your call right now. Leave a message." I didn't. I just listened to her tone, formal, polite, the same tone she used for everyone she needed to keep at a distance. I walked to the window, watching the light catch on the glass. Down below, someone was stringing Christmas lights on a balcony, humming along to a song I couldn't quite hear. The normalcy of it made my stomach twist. For a moment I considered driving to my mother's house, showing up just to see if this was real. But then my laptop screen caught my eye, an email confirmation glowing at the top of the inbox. Reservation confirmed. The Riverlight Hall, December 24. I clicked it open, staring at the total balance, $60,000. Paid. In full. My credit card number right there beneath it. The irony hit me like a cold slap. They'd uninvited me from a party I had already paid for. The thought was so absurd that for a second I almost laughed again. Instead, I sank onto the edge of the couch, coffee still in my hand, and let the silence spread around me. A faint hum came from the heater. Outside, the snow was turning heavier, falling in lazy spirals. I could almost hear my sister's voice again. "You always make Christmas too serious, Julia. It's supposed to be fun." She said that every year, usually after arriving 2 hours late with a cheap bottle of wine and an apology that wasn't really an apology. Mom would laugh, pat her hand, and then glance at me like I was the one being difficult. Last year, when I showed up at Riverlight Hall after working a 12-hour shift they'd already started without me, Sophie raised her glass and said, "Look who finally made it." Everyone laughed. I told myself it didn't matter. I was tired, but at least they were happy. I even stayed late to tip the staff and settle the bill while the rest of them danced to a playlist I had made. That was the kind of family we were, loud, charming, and cruel in small, practiced ways. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Sophie. "Don't make this awkward, okay?" Mom said. "It's better this way. You're always so busy. Enjoy your break." My throat tightened. The words were dipped in fake concern, the kind she used when she wanted to hurt me without sounding mean. I typed and deleted 3 different replies before locking the screen. Anything I said would just become another joke in their next conversation. I could already hear Mom saying, "See, this is what I meant. She takes everything too personally." I walked to the kitchen sink, poured the coffee down the drain, and listened to the hollow swirl as it disappeared. My reflection in the window looked tired, older somehow. 36 didn't feel old until mornings like this. I'd spent my adult life proving I could handle things: mortgage bills, family traditions, all the invisible work that kept our holidays shining. And now suddenly I was unnecessary. Maybe that was what they'd wanted all along, to see what happened when the reliable one stepped aside. The silence in the apartment felt heavier with every passing minute. I picked up my phone again, scrolling through the emails from the Riverlight Hall: confirmation of catering, contract for the live jazz trio, invoices for floral arrangements. The total $60,000. I could almost see Sophie's smile when she bragged about it to her friends. My sister books the best places. She'd never said my sister pays for it, but everyone knew. Everyone except me pretended it was normal. I sat back down and opened my notes app. For some reason, I started typing out every cost, every transfer, every receipt. Maybe part of me wanted proof that I wasn't imagining how much I'd given. Maybe I just needed to see it laid out. Each number lined up like a confession deposit: 20,000, catering 15, decor 5, entertainment 8, tips, extras, service fees. All of it mine. I stared at the total at the bottom and whispered to the empty room, "And now I'm not invited." A sound escaped me, something between a laugh and a breath that caught halfway. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth, holding it there until it steadied. Outside, a car door slammed. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor's radio played a Christmas song. The lyrics drifted faintly through the walls, too sweet to bear. I closed my laptop, unable to look at the glowing balance any longer. The edges of my vision prickled with something sharp, not quite tears. Not yet. I walked to the window again. Snow had started to settle along the street, frosting the rooftops. I remembered the first time I'd booked Riverlight Hall. Mom had cried. She said it was the most beautiful Christmas we'd ever had. She never mentioned that I had paid for it with 2 months overtime. She just told everyone how our family pulled it off together. That was always the script. We never, Julia. My phone buzzed one last time. This time it was from an unknown number. When I opened it, I saw a group photo already circulating in the family thread. Sophie in the center, smiling wide, Mom beside her, both holding champagne. The caption read, "The Bennetts are keeping Christmas simple this year." There were hearts and comments from cousins, emojis, likes. I wasn't tagged. I didn't exist. Something inside me went very still. The hurt that had been boiling began to cool, hardening into something sharper. I stared at the photo until my eyes blurred, then turned the phone face down. I walked back to the counter, leaned on my palms, and took a slow breath. They had made their decision. They had chosen their version of family. But they'd forgotten one detail: the contract, the reservation, the money. All of it was under my name. The thought settled like a seed taking root. For the first time that morning, I didn't feel powerless. The quiet around me wasn't heavy anymore. It was deliberate, full of space to think. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 9:20. The manager of Riverlight Hall would be in by now. I picked up my phone, scrolled to the contact list, and paused on the name Harper, Riverlight Hall manager. My reflection in the dark screen looked calm. Cold even. They thought they could decide for me. They had no idea what I was capable of deciding in return. The snow outside kept falling soft and steady as I pressed the phone to my ear and waited for the call to connect. The morning after the message, Portland was covered in a thin gray fog that pressed against the windows of my apartment. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee cooling beside my laptop, the steam fading as if the room itself were holding its breath. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, the same words blinked across my mind like a cruel ticker tape. We already decided. You're not joining Christmas this year. The cursor on my screen hovered over the folder marked Holiday Files. Inside it were years of spreadsheets, invoices, and notes, proof that for as long as I could remember, the Bennett Christmas wasn't just a family tradition. It was my production. I was the planner, the financier, the one who made sure the night sparkled even when no one thanked me for the light. I clicked open the current year's file. The title stared back at me in bold black letters: Riverlight Hall, Christmas Eve reservation. Beneath it was the total $60,000. Deposit paid. Balance due December 22nd. The due date was tomorrow. I leaned back, my stomach turning. They had uninvited me from an event that didn't even exist without me. I scrolled further, each line a quiet confession. Venue deposit $20,000. Catering $15,000. Live jazz trio $8. Decor and floral arrangements $5. Service staff and gratuity $12. All labeled, all charged to my card. Each year, I told myself it was worth it because at least it brought the family together. Now it was just a ledger of delusion. Outside, the street hummed faintly. Somewhere below, a car door slammed and a child laughed, the sound sharp against the quiet of my apartment. I took a sip of cold coffee, then reached for my phone. My thumb hovered over the contact marked Riverlight Hall. I wasn't sure what I planned to say, only that I needed to hear something real. Riverlight Hall, this is Harper speaking. The familiar voice was smooth and professional. Hi, Mr. Harper. This is Julia Bennett. Miss Bennett, good morning. The private ballroom for Christmas Eve, correct? Everything's confirmed and ready to go. Are there any updates you'd like to make? I hesitated. Has anyone been in touch recently about the event? He paused. Your sister, I believe. Sophie, she stopped by last week to confirm guest numbers. She mentioned you wouldn't be attending this year. My grip on the phone tightened. Did she? Yes, but everything remains under your name, of course. Nothing changes without your approval. Thank you, Mr. Harper. Please keep it that way. Of course, Miss Bennett. Merry Christmas. The call ended, but I sat there for several seconds, the phone still pressed to my ear. Sophie had walked into the restaurant I'd paid for and acted as though she owned it. My pulse beat hard in my throat, but beneath the anger was something colder, a kind of clarity that didn't burn. I opened my laptop again, scrolling through old receipts. Each one told the same story, a pattern of generosity mistaken for obligation. The first year, Mom had cried with joy at the sight of the decorated ballroom. It's the most beautiful Christmas we've ever had, she'd said, hugging me tightly while cameras flashed around her. Later, when neighbors asked whose idea it was, she smiled and said, "We just wanted to do something special as a family. We, never I." The next year, when I mentioned scaling back the budget, Sophie laughed. "You're the one with the money, Jules. It's practically your holiday." I remember the way she'd said it, half joke, half truth, and the way Mom had nodded in agreement. That's how it started. Each December I wrote the checks and they wrote the narrative. I opened another tab in the spreadsheet labeled Family Support. Numbers stretched down the page: mortgage payments, insurance premiums, loan transfers. I had spent years thinking I was helping them stay afloat. Now, staring at the totals, I realized I'd been keeping them comfortable enough to forget who made it possible. The silence in my apartment grew heavier. I stood pacing from the table to the window, my reflection a faint blur in the glass. For a moment, I thought about driving to Charlotte and walking into Riverlight Hall on Christmas Eve, watching their faces when they saw me. But that idea evaporated almost instantly. Showing up wouldn't fix anything. It would only feed the story that I was too dramatic. What I wanted wasn't attention. It was the truth. I sat again, hands hovering above the keyboard. A notification blinked in the corner of my screen, an unread email from Mom sent 3 weeks earlier. Subject line: Holiday Logistics. I clicked it open. The message was short. "Don't worry about the details this year, Julia. You've done enough. Let Sophie handle it." I read it twice. The words looked polite, almost caring, until you felt the dismissal tucked inside them. I checked the attachments. One of them was a spreadsheet titled Final Guest List. When I opened it, my stomach tightened. There were 26 names neatly aligned, alphabetized. Mine wasn't there. At the bottom in small italic text was a note: all invoices to remain under existing accounts until after December 24. I exhaled, slow and steady. It wasn't just exclusion, it was strategy. They had planned to use my name and my money to carry the show, then cut me out of the credits. For years I'd believed silence was grace, that not reacting meant maturity. But grace without recognition isn't virtue, it's surrender. I highlighted the document title, saved it to my desktop under a new folder, and renamed it Proof. Then I sat back and let the realization settle like dust after an explosion. Every favor, every payment, every hour I'd spent fixing their lives, it had all built the illusion of a family that didn't actually include me. Outside, the fog had thickened, curling against the windows like smoke. I pulled my sweater tighter, replaying Harper's words in my head. Nothing changes without your approval. He didn't know how right he was. I opened my notebook and started to write. Page 1, Christmas 2023. Expenditure log. Beneath it, I listed every service still active: catering, floral design, live jazz, venue, cleaning crew. Next to each line, I wrote one word: authorized. At the bottom, I drew a small square and wrote Control Julia Bennett. My handwriting looked steadier than I felt. The ink pressed hard into the paper, leaving faint grooves. The phone buzzed beside me, a message from Sophie, cheerful and careless. Mom's picking up her dress today. It's going to be magical. I stared at the text, then locked the screen without replying. Magical. The word tasted bitter. I stood and walked to the kitchen, poured out the cold coffee, and filled the mug again. The ritual steadied me. Warm air rose from the cup, fogging my glasses. For the first time since yesterday, I felt a sense of control. Small, fragile, but real. When I sat back down, I opened a new document and began typing. They think I'm out of the picture. Maybe it's time to let them see what happens when the picture loses its frame. The line made me pause. My reflection on the dark screen stared back, tired, yes, but sharper than before. I minimized the document, returned to my email, and drafted a short note addressed to Harper at Riverlight Hall. Dear Mr. Harper, regarding the Bennett family Christmas reservation, please hold all future changes until I provide written confirmation. Do not process any new requests under my account. Sincerely, Julia Bennett. I didn't send it yet. Not because I hesitated, but because I wanted them to step fully into their illusion before the floor disappeared beneath them. By the time I closed my laptop, the day had turned to a pale gold. Sunlight leaked weakly through the clouds, catching dust motes in the air. I stood by the window looking out at the quiet street below. The fog had lifted just enough to reveal the outlines of Christmas lights strung across balconies. For years I had built their holidays. The lights, the laughter, the illusion of unity. And they had mistaken it for love they didn't have to return. I reached for my notebook again and underlined the last line I had written: Control returns to the payer. Then in small, neat letters, I added a new one: Nothing changes without my approval. The words felt solid in my chest. Like the first brick of a wall I hadn't known I was allowed to build. Outside, a gust of wind scattered the last of the morning fog. I watched it drift away, light and final, before turning back to the desk. Tomorrow I thought would be a good day to start cleaning house. Saturday morning arrived, wrapped in rain. It tapped against my kitchen window, steady and soft, like a reminder that the world outside kept moving, even when mine had stalled. I sat at the table with a fresh cup of coffee, staring at the same inbox I'd opened a dozen times this week. Nothing new. No apologies, no explanations. Just silence, the same weapon they'd always used to control me. Mom used to say that silence keeps the peace. I'd believed her once, mistaking quiet for harmony. But now I knew better. Silence wasn't peace. It was power. It let people rewrite reality while you sat too stunned to interrupt. I refreshed my emails again, the motion automatic. Still nothing. The emptiness of that screen told me everything I needed to know. I turned to my laptop and opened the shared family drive, the one labeled Bennett Christmas Files. It had always been the hub for planning menus, guest lists, playlists, every spreadsheet color-coded by me. When the message appeared, I froze. Access denied. I blinked, clicked again and again. The red warning stayed. I copied the old link from my bookmarks, pasted it into the browser, and pressed enter. The same message flashed: ownership transferred to Sophie Bennett. My chest tightened, not from surprise, but from confirmation. I was the one who had created that folder 4 years ago. I had built it, updated it, stored every receipt and photo inside. It wasn't just files, they were memories, proof of what I had built for them. And now it was gone, locked behind someone else's password. Even the memories had new management. I closed the laptop, sat back, and stared at the ceiling. For a few minutes, the only sound was the clock ticking against the wall. I whispered to no one. If they're rewriting history, I need a copy of the original script. I stood, went to the closet, and pulled out a small plastic bin from the bottom shelf. Inside, wrapped in a piece of linen, was my old external hard drive. I hadn't touched it in years. It was covered in dust, the label fading, backups 2018-2022. I plugged it into the laptop, waited for the light to blink, and watched as the folders began to appear. The first one was Christmas 2019, then Christmas 2020. Each held hundreds of photos and spreadsheets. I clicked through them, the thumbnails loading slowly, one by one. Mom smiling beside the decorated tree. Sophie holding her glass of wine, Daniel posing in front of the dessert table. And in every photo I was missing or blurred in the background, carrying something, setting a table out of focus, but always working. I stared at one picture longer than the others. Sophie had captioned it years ago. Perfect night. Couldn't have done it without Mom. I had been the one taking the picture. My hands literally held the camera that erased me. I copied everything to my laptop, creating a new folder and naming it Proof of Contribution. The title felt absurdly formal, but I liked the sound of it. Clean. Undeniable. One by one the files transferred. Years of work, thousands of moments. Every receipt I'd kept, every invoice marked paid by J. Bennett. I watched the progress bar crawl forward, each percentage another reminder that silence had never been mutual. It had always served them. When the transfer finished, I opened my banking app. Rows of withdrawals scrolled down the screen: venue deposits, floral orders, catering services. Every expense still active. My money had funded every toast, every smile. I clicked into the details. Automatic payments, authorized by me. I took screenshots, saving each one to my new folder. They thought my silence meant consent. They forgot silence can also mean record keeping. At noon, I picked up the phone and dialed Mom's number. It rang 3 times before going to voicemail. Her recorded voice sounded the same as always, sweet, calm, rehearsed. "This is Margaret Bennett. Leave a message." When the beep came, I said, "Hi, it's Julia. I just want to confirm the reservation details, since everything's still under my account." My tone was even polite. I didn't mention the drive or the money or the access denied. I didn't need to. The words themselves were enough of a reminder. I hung up without waiting for a response. Later, as I washed the coffee mug, my phone buzzed with a new notification. It was a social media post from Sophie, a photo of herself standing in a boutique, holding up a sequin dress with the caption, "Can't wait for the most perfect Christmas ever." I stared at the photo until my throat tightened. Perfect. That was always her word. Perfect hair, perfect party, perfect image. I was the one who made perfection look effortless, and they'd convinced the world it belonged to them. I dried the mug, set it down, and went back to my desk. This time I opened a blank spreadsheet and began typing. Column A, expense type. Column B, amount. Column C, proof, location. Mortgage, utilities, catering, venue. Next to each line, I added links to the receipts, emails, and confirmations. By the time I reached the bottom, the page looked clinical, cold. But beneath it was something alive, a quiet pulse of control returning to me. The rain outside softened into drizzle. The light through the window had shifted from gray to gold. I leaned back, rubbing my eyes. My phone buzzed again. A new text from Mom. Just 2 words. Doing okay? I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't concern, it was surveillance. The kind of message that made it seem like she cared, while reminding you that she was watching. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my Photos app and found a picture from last year, me standing in Riverlight Hall's kitchen, hair pulled back, holding a tray of cookies. Everyone else was laughing in the dining room. The photo had been taken accidentally by one of the waiters. I'd kept it because it was the only proof that I was ever there. I dragged the image into my proof of contribution folder and renamed it The One Time I Was Seen. The act felt like reclaiming oxygen after years of breathing someone else's air. For the rest of the afternoon, I kept gathering. Emails from caterers, notes from florists, every confirmation under my name. I saved them all, labeling each carefully. By 5 o'clock, the folder was full, dozens of documents lined up like witnesses waiting to testify. I stared at them for a long time. My reflection hovered in the dark screen, faint but steady. They built a family on denial. I would build mine on documentation. Before shutting down the laptop, I decided to preserve one last piece of proof. I opened my messages and scrolled back to Sophie's text. We already decided, you're not joining Christmas this year. I took a screenshot, dated and time-stamped, and dragged it into the folder. It landed right in the center, surrounded by all the evidence of what I had carried. The rain outside had stopped. The room smelled faintly of coffee and paper. I sat in silence, the kind that finally felt like mine. It was strange, this calm, this clarity. For years, I had accepted chaos as family tradition. Now, in its absence, everything felt too still, almost fragile. But I knew better than to mistake quiet for weakness. I closed the laptop, letting the screen fade to black. The reflection that looked back at me wasn't the woman who begged for understanding or worked herself raw for scraps of gratitude. It was someone else, someone who knew that silence could be used both as a weapon and a shield. I placed my hand flat on the closed lid, as if sealing a promise. They had taken my voice. I had taken their certainty. The clock ticked once, twice steady. Outside, the last of the rain shimmered under the streetlight. I whispered into the empty room, silence was their weapon. Proof will be mine. The words hung there for a moment, heavy but clean, before dissolving into the quiet I finally understood. The first real snow of December arrived overnight, blanketing the city in a thin, clean layer that softened every sound. When I opened the curtains that morning, Portland looked new, quiet, untouched, pretending innocence. I made coffee and sat by the window watching flakes drift down in lazy spirals. Somewhere out there, my family was probably preparing for their perfect Christmas, oblivious that the ground beneath their illusion was beginning to crack. I turned toward the desk where my laptop waited. The folder labeled Proof of Contribution glowed like a quiet heartbeat on the desktop. It had grown overnight, new emails, screenshots, and receipts I'd added before bed. I clicked it open, scrolling through the files until I reached one marked mortgage agreement, 2019. I hadn't opened that document in years. My mother's name was printed in bold at the top. Beneath it in smaller font was mine, co-borrower, not co-owner. I traced the words with my finger on the screen, reading the sentence over and over. The co-borrower assumes financial liability but holds no claim of ownership. I remembered signing those papers at her kitchen table 4 years ago. Mom had worn her reading glasses low on her nose, smiling as she slid the folder toward me. It's just for stability, she'd said. You know how banks are. Once things settle, I'll switch it into my name. I'd believed her. Of course I had. She was my mother. Now, seeing the truth in black and white, the memory felt like a trick. The kind you only recognize after the applause fades. I opened my spreadsheet again, the one where I tracked every recurring payment, the mortgage, the utilities, the property taxes. For 48 months straight, my account had carried the weight of that house. 48 months of, don't worry, I'll handle it next time. My chest tightened as I scrolled to the most recent line. Mortgage payment $1.420 cleared December 1. I stared at it until the numbers blurred, until the steady hum of the refrigerator became the only sound in the apartment. It wasn't just the money. It was the story behind it. For years I had told myself that helping was love, that paying meant belonging. But all it had bought me was a seat outside the window watching them celebrate in a house I had paid to keep warm. I closed the spreadsheet and leaned back, pressing the heel of my hand against my forehead. Enough, I whispered. The word hung in the air like an exhale that had taken years to release. After a few minutes, I reached for the folder again. I opened a new subfolder and typed a title, Frozen Accounts. My hand hesitated above the keyboard, but only for a moment. Then I began dragging files into it. Mortgage documents, utility bills, insurance records. Each one slid into place with a quiet click, like puzzle pieces locking together. Outside, the snow kept falling soft and soundless. By noon, the air in the apartment felt colder, though the heat was still running. I made another cup of coffee and sat back down. I wasn't angry, not really. Anger had burned itself out years ago. What replaced it was something cleaner, sharper clarity. I opened my bank app. The familiar numbers blinked up at me, steady and obedient. I tapped on the mortgage account. The balance appeared first, then the schedule of payments. January 1, next draft date. My thumb hovered over the small gray word at the bottom of the screen, options. I didn't press it. Not yet. Instead, I scrolled slowly through the history, month after month, of withdrawals, every one marked on time. I thought of all the things I'd sacrificed for that consistency, trips. I never took clothes. I never bought nights. I stayed late at work to make sure I could cover everything. And for what? For a family that had deleted me from their group chat without hesitation. The quiet inside me hardened. When I was little, my mother used to tell me that trust was a kind of investment. You give and you wait, she'd said once while teaching me how to balance a checkbook. Love, loyalty, time, they all pay dividends eventually. I smiled bitterly at the memory. Her math had always worked best in her favor. I clicked back to the folder and began writing notes in a separate document. Mortgage fully funded by Julia. Utilities autopay under Julia. Insurance Julia. Every item became a tally mark in the invisible ledger of my life. The clock ticked softly on the wall. Around 2 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed. A message from Sophie. Mom says the caterer needs final numbers. Can you confirm payment went through? I stared at the text, my thumb trembling slightly above the screen. Then I set the phone down, face down on the table. I didn't owe them a reply. Not anymore. Instead, I pulled out the manila envelope where I kept my physical records, receipts, invoices, contracts. I spread them across the table, the paper whispering as it moved. The sheer volume of it startled me. 4 years of documents, every page marked with my signature. Somewhere under the weight of it all, I found a copy of the original catering contract. Client Julia Bennett. Event Bennett Family Christmas Gala. Location Riverlight Hall. My name again everywhere, their names nowhere. A laugh escaped me, not bitter, just tired. It sounded strange in the empty apartment. I stacked the papers neatly, then opened my email and drafted a message to myself. Subject line, control measures. In the body, I listed each service still linked to my account: mortgage, gas, electric, internet, catering, venue. Next to each, I wrote one word in bold: pending. Then, at the bottom, I typed, if they don't want me at Christmas, they don't get Christmas on my dime. I hit save as draft. The act was simple, almost clinical, but the feeling that followed was something I hadn't felt in years. Authority. As dusk settled outside, the snow turned to rain, melting into thin silver streaks against the glass. I turned on a single lamp, its light spilling across the documents. A memory surfaced then, last year's Christmas Eve. I'd arrived late after working overtime to cover a client account. When I walked in, the dining room was already full, the laughter too loud, too rehearsed. Sophie had looked up from her glass of champagne and smirked. Well, if it isn't the sponsor. Everyone had laughed, assuming it was a joke. I'd laughed too, pretending it didn't sting. Now sitting here alone, the memory no longer hurt. It clarified. They had called me the sponsor because that's exactly what I was. Not a sister, not a daughter. A financial institution with a pulse. I picked up one of the receipts and traced the printed numbers with my fingertip. It was an invoice from Riverlight Hall dated the week before. Remaining balance $40,000. I thought about the email Harper had sent, confirming that everything was ready for the big night. Tomorrow I could change that. The decision didn't explode out of me. It didn't roar or burn. It arrived like snowfall, steady, soundless, inevitable. I turned off the lamp and stood by the window. Outside, the city lights shimmered on wet pavement. Cars passed below their headlights, carving brief paths through the dark. Behind me, the laptop screen dimmed to black, leaving the reflection of my face faintly visible in the glass. I looked older than I remembered, but stronger too. I whispered almost to the ghost of my reflection, "You don't owe them another cent." The words felt solid, final. I walked back to the desk and reopened my bank app. The small gray words still waited at the bottom options. This time I tapped it. A new list appeared: pause, freeze, cancel, autopay. My finger hovered over the first choice, but I didn't press it yet. Not tonight. Not until I was certain. Instead, I opened a new folder on my desktop and named it Evidence. Into it, I dragged copies of every file: the mortgage, the catering, the emails, even the text from Sophie. Each one slid into place like a sealed envelope. When I was done, I sat back and closed my eyes. The quiet around me didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt intentional. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and gleaming. I turned off the light, letting the room fall into darkness. The glow from the laptop still lingered, faint and blue like a pulse in the night. Somewhere miles away, my family was toasting to another perfect Christmas. And somewhere inside me, something long frozen had begun to thaw, not into forgiveness, but into freedom. The night I finally opened the catering contract again, the wind outside my apartment whistled against the glass like it was trying to warn me. I didn't need warning. I already knew where this road led. The document stared at me from the screen, my signature scrawled at the bottom, the total highlighted in yellow: $60,000 due by December 22nd. I checked the calendar. 3 days. The deadline sat there patient, certain, waiting for my decision. I turned off the overhead light and let the glow of the laptop wash across the kitchen. The apartment was silent, except for the steady hum of the refrigerator and the faint tap of sleet on the window. I'd spent years in this kind of silence, doing fixing, paying. This time it didn't feel empty. It felt like preparation. I clicked open the bank portal again and scrolled to the account linked to Riverlight Hall. Each line of the ledger sparkled with reminders of who I'd been: deposits, prepayments, service confirmations. I had never missed a due date. I had never said no. I opened a notepad and began to write each keystroke: deliberate mortgage, utilities, catering, venue, floral, music. At the bottom, I added a final word underlined twice: control. For the first time in years, I felt the power in it. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The city outside was still gray, the streets slick from last night's rain. I made coffee, opened the curtains, and sat back at the table. A message waited in my inbox: Sophie. The subject line read, "Final confirmations, need your card info." I laughed softly, the sound more breath than amusement. She had no idea the ground beneath her was already shifting. I clicked the message open anyway. "Hey Jules, Mom said you probably forgot the catering link. Can you send it today? They won't process the final bill without the card on file. No rush, just need it before Friday. No rush." The audacity in those 2 words almost made me admire her. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. I dragged it into the evidence folder and renamed it Entitlement Proof 1. After breakfast, I opened a new file and titled it The Ledger of Sacrifice. Inside, I began to document everything that had ever been taken for granted. rent payments for Mom's house, the time I covered Sophie's student loan payment, the utilities I'd kept running during their tight months, each one a quiet debt that had never been acknowledged. By mid-morning, the document had grown into something sprawling alive. Each line was a heartbeat of the person I used to be, the one who mistook usefulness for love. I leaned back, pressing my palms against my eyes until sparks flared behind them. "You built their comfort," I whispered, "and they built your absence." The words settled in the air, harsh but true. The phone rang, the sound sharp enough to make me jump. The caller ID read Mom. For a brief second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then I answered. "Hi, sweetheart." Her voice came syrupy and rehearsed. "I just wanted to check if the payment for the venue went through." Harper called, saying something about a hold. I kept my tone even. "It's under review." A pause. "Under review. What does that mean?" "It means," I said slowly, "that nothing moves without my approval." "Remember?" Silence stretched across the line. Then she laughed, light and airy, pretending nothing was wrong. "Of course, darling. You've always been so organized. We just don't want any last-minute issues. You know how people talk." "Yes," I said. "I do." The call ended with her promising to check in later. I knew she would. Panic always wears politeness first. By afternoon, the snow had started again, thin, powdery flakes drifting lazily past my window. I pulled on a sweater and sat back at the computer. The ledger of sacrifice glowed on the screen, half filled with entries, each one a small act of penance for a family that never asked, never thanked, never noticed. I scrolled to the bottom and typed a final note. "If silence is what they want, silence is what they'll pay for." I stared at the sentence for a long time, then highlighted it in gold. When the phone buzzed again, it wasn't Mom. It was an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Miss Bennett," a man's voice said. "This is Harper from Riverlight Hall." "Yes, Mr. Harper, I know. I just wanted to confirm the catering company sent over a question about your authorization. They said your sister contacted them, but since the contract's under your name..." He trailed off politely, waiting for direction. "Don't accept any changes," I said. "Freeze everything until further notice." "Understood," he replied. "Should I notify the staff?" "Yes. And send me written confirmation." He promised to email within the hour. I thanked him and hung up. The moment the call ended, the apartment felt different, lighter, sharper, charged. It was happening. Quietly, deliberately, legally. At 6 that evening, the confirmation email arrived. I printed it, signing the bottom with my initials before sliding it into a clear plastic sleeve. I added it to the growing pile of evidence on the counter. While the printer hummed, I poured myself a glass of wine and leaned against the sink. The snow outside had stopped. The city lights glowed against the thin crust of ice, everything clean, almost forgiving. But forgiveness was never part of the plan. I turned back to the desk and opened my notes again. One file stood out, the spreadsheet titled Charitable Donations. It listed every time my mother had hosted an event in her name. I scrolled to the bottom and found the most recent entry, Bennett Family Fundraiser. Donation, $10,000, Julia Bennett. It had been my money, my name, but her speech thanking the community hadn't mentioned me once. The newspaper headline from that night still lived in my saved files, Margaret Bennett, a beacon of holiday generosity. I copied it into the folder titled Rewritten Histories. For the next hour, I kept sorting, labeling, categorizing. Every piece of evidence went into its rightful place, like arranging the bones of a truth I was finally ready to resurrect. When I finished, I sat back and took a deep breath. The apartment was still. The pile of documents beside me looked almost ceremonial, like relics of a religion I'd finally stopped worshipping. Then my phone buzzed again. Another message from Sophie. "Mom's nervous." "You didn't forget about the payments, right?" I typed one word back, "No." She replied instantly, "Good. Would hate for anything to go wrong." I locked the screen and set the phone down. "So would I whispered. It was nearly midnight by the time I closed my laptop. The snow had returned heavier, now swirling in thick white waves outside the window. I poured the last of my wine and stood in the dark watching the flakes coat the rooftops. The city felt far away, quiet and unaware. Somewhere out there, my family was probably celebrating, early secure in the fantasy that I was still the same Julia. Still dependable. Still silent. But silence wasn't surrender anymore. It was strategy. I turned off the lamp and stood in the dim glow of the kitchen. The documents on the counter caught the faint light, the edges gleaming like armor. I ran my hand over them gently and whispered, "They called me dependable." They never asked what happens when dependable stops showing up. Then, without hesitation, I opened a new file on my laptop. At the top, I typed 2 words, "The plan." Underneath the first line appeared clearly, each letter sharp against the pale screen, Phase 1 freeze. Outside, the snow fell thicker, swallowing the sounds of the city. Inside, the only thing that moved was the cursor blinking steady and alive, waiting for the next step. It was raining again that Tuesday afternoon when I met Evelyn for coffee. The city looked washed out, gray against gray, the kind of day that made everything feel half erased. I sat by the window of a small cafe downtown, watching drops race each other down the glass until her reflection appeared beside mine. "You look like someone about to audit her family," she said, setting down her umbrella and sliding into the chair across from me. I managed a smile. Maybe that's exactly what I'm doing. Evelyn worked with me, at the firm, sharp, steady, never one to dance around the truth. She had a way of seeing people for what they were not, what they pretended to be. I hadn't planned on telling her everything, but as soon as the waiter poured our coffees and walked away, the words came like a tide I couldn't hold back. "They uninvited me," I said, tracing my finger along the rim of the cup. "After years of paying for every light, every meal, every piece of music that made them look good. They sent a message like it was logistics, not betrayal." Evelyn didn't interrupt. Her eyes stayed steady on mine, dark and knowing. "And now," I continued, "they're about to throw another grand Christmas party at my expense. $60,000 worth of food and flowers and smiles. Except this time I'm not invited." She leaned back, folding her arms. "You're still paying, not for long." For a moment we just listened to the sound of the rain. Then she spoke softly, the way you talk when a truth is too sharp to drop all at once. "Julia, they didn't just take your money. They took credit for your love. That's worse." I nodded, feeling something tighten and then loosen in my chest. I thought keeping quiet made me strong. Turns out it just made me convenient. The cafe was nearly empty. A young couple shared a pastry by the counter, laughing quietly. Somewhere behind us, the espresso machine hissed a sound that felt almost like punctuation. Evelyn stirred her coffee, her spoon clicking lightly against the mug. "You remind me of myself," she said. "Years ago, when my father passed, I cared for my mother until the end. My brother handled the paperwork, or that's what he said. When the will came, my name was gone from the house entirely. He told me it was what Dad wanted." I looked at her, startled. "What did you do?" "I signed everything he gave me out of love," she said, smiling bitterly. "He signed everything out of greed." She took a slow sip of her coffee before continuing. "I learned something important, then silence doesn't protect you. It trains them to think they can rewrite your part of the story." The words landed somewhere deep. She leaned forward. "So what's your next move?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Part of me wants to confront them. Part of me wants to disappear." Evelyn shook her head. "Confrontation feeds them. Disappearance rewards them. Neither gives you closure." I frowned. "Then what does control?" she said simply. "You don't need to raise your voice, Julia. Just stop being the invisible hand that props them up. Let their comfort feel the absence of your contribution." I stared at her, the simplicity of it hitting harder than any anger ever could. "You're saying, let them live without me," she smiled faintly. "Exactly. Let silence be your announcement." Outside, the rain grew heavier, tapping against the glass like a metronome. I looked down at my cup, the steam curling upward, and for the first time in weeks, I felt my breathing steady. What would that even look like? I asked. Evelyn shrugged. Start small. Check what's in your name. Decide what happens when you stop paying. Let the facts do the talking. I opened my bag and pulled out my notebook. I've already made a list, I said, flipping it open. Mortgage, utilities, catering, Riverlight Hall, every bill, every contract. All mine. Her smile widened, proud and knowing. Then you already hold the match. You just haven't struck it yet. I laughed, but it came out quiet, almost disbelieving. You make it sound easy. It's not easy, she said, but it's clean. And clean is better than fair. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The world outside blurred into streaks of silver and white. Somewhere in the background, a jazz song hummed through the speakers, something soft and distant. Finally, Evelyn reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. You deserve peace, not approval. They'll never give you what you're waiting for, but you can give it to yourself. The kindness in her voice caught me off guard. I blinked back the sting in my eyes and whispered, peace feels like a luxury I forgot how to afford. She squeezed my hand once. Then it's time to invest again. When I got home that evening, the apartment smelled faintly of rain and coffee. The quiet didn't scare me anymore. It steadied me. I hung up my coat, turned on a single lamp, and sat at the desk. My notebook was still open to the list. I took out a pen and wrote one new line under the other's, freeze everything. Then next to it, I wrote Evelyn's words, revenge equals clarity plus silence. I closed my eyes and repeated them under my breath. For years, I'd told myself that forgiveness was strength. But strength, I was realizing, could also mean refusing to be used again. I opened my laptop, found the folder marked frozen accounts, and began adding details, account numbers, draft dates, payment schedules. The motion was calm, methodical. Each click felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I hadn't realized was missing. An hour later, I drafted an email to Mr. Harper at Riverlight Hall. I didn't send it yet. It was short, clinical, and final. Dear Mr. Harper, please suspend all pending payments and service authorizations under my account effective immediately. Further instructions to follow. Regards, Julia Bennett. I reread it 3 times, letting the weight of each word sink in. Then I saved it to drafts. Not tonight, tomorrow. The next step wasn't about anger, it was about timing. Let them keep believing everything was fine, right up until the lights went out. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, watching my reflection shimmer in the window. My face looked calm, maybe even cold. But I didn't mind that anymore. Cold was steady. Cold didn't break. The rain slowed the sound, fading into nothing. I turned off the lights and stood in the doorway, the glow from the laptop still spilling across the table. Evelyn's words replayed in my head. Let silence be your announcement. I walked to my desk, closed the laptop, and let the darkness settle around me. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel erased. I felt deliberate. I took a deep breath and whispered into the still air, tomorrow's silence will speak for me. The sound of my own voice startled me, low, certain, final. Outside, the last of the rain stopped. The city exhaled into quiet. Inside, I stood in that stillness and felt something unfamiliar but unmistakable rise in me, not bitterness, not sorrow, authority. And with that, I knew the next phase had already begun. The morning broke in a gray hush, Portland wrapped in mist, so thick it seemed to muffle every sound. I woke before sunrise, long before the city stirred. The air smelled faintly of rain and old coffee, and the light through the curtains looked cold, deliberate. I sat at the table with a mug in my hands, staring at the draft of the email I had written the night before. The subject line glowed on the screen like a dare. Cancellation request, Riverlight Hall. For a long time, I didn't move. I just watched the seconds change on the corner of my laptop screen. 7:57. At 8, Mr. Harper would start his shift. I set the mug down and placed both hands on the keyboard. They thought removing me was their decision. They forgot who signed the bills. At exactly 8 o'clock, I hit send. The faint whoosh of the email leaving my outbox felt like the closing of a door. I leaned back and exhaled slowly. No fireworks, no rush of guilt. Just stillness, the kind that follows the right kind of ending. I walked to the window where fog pressed against the glass in pale swirls. Outside, the street lamps glowed faintly through the mist. My phone buzzed once, a soft reminder that the message had gone through. Confirmation delivered. I let the device rest on the counter and poured another cup of coffee. For years, I'd been the one who held everything together. The planner, the financier, the one who fixed whatever someone else broke. Now I was the one dismantling it. And the irony was, it felt like repair. By mid-morning, I had already received 2 automated replies. One from Riverlight Hall confirming the event's termination request, and another from the catering company acknowledging the suspended payment. Each subject line was sterile, procedural, almost boring. But to me, they sounded like freedom. The apartment was still filled only with the steady hum of the heater. I opened the confirmation email from Harper, reading it twice. All services related to the Bennett family Christmas event have been canceled as per account holder authorization. I saved a copy to my folder, then printed one for the growing pile on my kitchen counter. When the phone rang an hour later, I knew exactly who it would be. "Miss Bennett," Harper said, his tone polite but hesitant. "I just wanted to verify that the cancellation request was intentional. It's rather short notice." "Yes," I said evenly. "It's intentional. Process it immediately. I'll handle any penalties." He cleared his throat. "Of course. I just thought I should mention your sister stopped by last week to confirm final details. She seemed very—" "I know," I interrupted. "You can disregard anything she said. My account, my authorization." "Understood," he replied after a pause. "I'll proceed with the full cancellation and send written confirmation within the hour." "Thank you, Mr. Harper." When the call ended, I stared at the phone in my hand for a moment before setting it down. I didn't feel victorious, just calm. Like something that had been hanging over me had finally landed. I opened the file titled Frozen Accounts and moved the new confirmations into it. Then I opened the folder labeled Proof, dragging over every receipt and correspondence I could find. The folders multiplied across the screen, clean, orderly, undeniable. Outside, the rain started again, thin and soft. By early afternoon, I had frozen the catering payments, canceled the florist order, and paused the deposit for the live band. Each click of the mouse felt like closing a window that had been left open too long. The silence that followed was different now. Not heavy, just precise. When the last confirmation email arrived, I added it to the pile and labeled it Riverlight Cancellations, verified. Then I sat back, closing my eyes. This was what taking control looked like, not dramatic or loud, but deliberate. Around 3, my phone buzzed again. A text from Sophie. "Hey, just checking, Harper. Said something weird about authorization. Everything's still good for Christmas Eve." "Right," I didn't reply. I took a screenshot, saved it, and dropped it into the folder titled Frozen Proof. They would know soon enough. By 5, the sky had turned the color of steel. I slipped on a coat and walked to the cafe around the corner. The place was warm and filled with the smell of cinnamon. Evelyn was already there, waiting by the window with 2 steaming cups of tea. "You did it, didn't you?" she asked as soon as I sat down. I smiled faintly. Every service canceled. Every payment frozen. Even the lighting deposit. Evelyn's eyebrows lifted, amused. "How do you feel, Light?" I said. "Like I just deleted a file that was eating up all my memory." She laughed softly. "That's the thing about family obligations. They grow like hidden programs until they crash your whole system." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching people hurry past the window with their scarves pulled tight. Eventually, Evelyn leaned forward. "They'll figure it out soon. I know. And when they do, I'll be home," I said, "simply drinking coffee." She smiled. "Then it's done. You've already won. When I left the cafe, the evening air was sharp and cold. Streetlights shimmered on the wet pavement. I walked slowly back to my apartment, feeling the faint sting of wind on my face. Inside the apartment was dim and still. I hung up my coat and turned on a single lamp. The documents on the table caught the light, the stack now thick enough to look like a small archive. I stood over them, tracing the edge of one page. Every sheet was proof of something I'd carried for too long. The phone buzzed again. A text from Mom this time. Harper just called. "What's going on? Please tell me. This is a mistake." I didn't answer. I took another screenshot and added it to the file. The phone lit up again moments later. Another message. "Julia, this is ridiculous. We have guests coming." Still, I said nothing. The messages came faster, her panic building in real time. "Call me now. Julia, answer your phone. We already paid for everything." No, I thought. I paid for everything. The apartment filled with the glow of notifications, the screen flashing again and again. I turned the phone face down on the counter, silencing the sound. The quiet that followed was absolute. I made another cup of coffee and stood by the window looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, my family was scrambling, realizing that the ground they stood on wasn't theirs. The lights of downtown flickered faintly through the fog, each one blurred like a memory I no longer needed to hold on to. I thought about the years I'd spent believing that love meant sacrifice, that being good meant being silent. But love without respect is servitude, and silence without recognition is erasure. I didn't feel like a villain. I felt like the accountant of justice balancing a ledger that had been wrong for too long. When the last of the daylight faded, I sat down at the desk and opened my notebook. On the first page, under the words Phase 1 Freeze, I wrote a single sentence, complete. I closed the notebook and stared at the still phone on the counter. It was strange how peace could feel both heavy and weightless at once. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air was cold enough to promise snow. I turned off the light, leaving the lamp's faint glow across the papers. My reflection shimmered in the window, calm, unshaken. "They called me cold," I murmured. "Maybe cold is what keeps me alive." I pressed my palm against the glass. The chill seeped into my skin, sharp but grounding. Somewhere in the city they were calling, shouting, panicking. But here in the quiet of my apartment, the storm had already passed. Christmas would come. But this year, silence would arrive first. 3 days before Christmas, the city glowed under a thin veil of frost, every rooftop shimmering as if the world itself had paused to listen. I woke early, not because I had plans, but because I didn't. The quiet stretched around me, full and unhurried. I brewed coffee, opened the curtains, and watched the gray morning unfold. Somewhere hundreds of miles away, my family was probably decorating the Riverlight Hall ballroom that no longer belonged to them. The apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon and rain. I carried my mug to the table where my laptop waited. The familiar folders lined up on the screen, like obedient soldiers, frozen accounts, proof, justice, archive. I clicked each one open, scrolling through the confirmations. Every service, every payment, every logistical thread of their grand Christmas Eve had been severed. The system was silent now, and that silence was mine. Outside, the street was waking up, car doors slamming, a dog barking somewhere down the block, the hum of early traffic. I didn't mind the noise. It made the stillness inside feel earned. I checked my email, half expecting another desperate message from Mom, but there was nothing new. Just unread newsletters, work updates, and one automatic reminder from the florist confirming the cancellation of their delivery. I stared at the line of text for a moment. Order terminated at client's request. Client. That word had weight. I wasn't the daughter anymore. I was the client, the owner, the one they couldn't erase. I closed the laptop and leaned back, letting the steam from my coffee blur my vision for a moment. By mid-morning, I was at the office. Most people had taken the week off, so the building was half empty. The quiet there matched the one inside me, steady, deliberate. Evelyn stopped by my desk just after 10, her scarf still damp from the drizzle outside. You look calmer than I expected, she said, setting a paper cup beside me. Should I be something else? She smiled. Most people would be pacing holes into their floor after what you did. I shrugged. There's nothing to pace about. Everything's already done. Evelyn tilted her head, studying me. You're sure you're ready for the fallout? I'm not waiting for it, I said. They are. She laughed softly and squeezed my shoulder. Remind me never to get on your bad side, Julia. That made me smile for the first time that morning. You're safe, I said. You always told me the truth. The rest of the day drifted by quietly. I worked through reports, answered a few emails, and ignored the persistent vibration of my phone. When I finally checked it at lunch, there were 5 missed calls from Mom, 2 from Sophie, and 1 voicemail from an unknown number. I didn't listen to any of them. Instead, I silenced the phone and slid it into my drawer. By the time I got home, the clouds had lifted, leaving a pale stretch of blue sky that looked fragile enough to break. I stood by the window, watching the light fade across the rooftops. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was missing out on Christmas. I felt like I had escaped it. Across the street, a family was stringing lights on their porch, laughing as the wind tangled the cords. I watched them for a while, not with envy, but curiosity. They looked like a photograph, momentary, idealized. I'd spent most of my life trying to create that same image for other people, making everything look easy while I stood behind the curtain, holding the frame in place. Not anymore. When the first message came through that evening, I almost didn't notice it. The sound was soft, a vibration against the counter as I made dinner. Then another and another. I wiped my hands on a towel and checked the screen. Mom, Harper said he can't reach you. Something's wrong with the payment system, Mom. Please tell me you didn't cancel anything. Guests are confirmed. Mom, Julia, answer me. I set the phone down and turned off the stove. The smell of roasted vegetables filled the kitchen, warm and sweet, grounding me in the moment. Their panic was far away, muffled by Miles and by choice. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat at the table, and opened my laptop again. The folders glowed softly in the dim light. I clicked on Justice Archive and reviewed everything one last time: emails, screenshots, contracts, timestamps. It was all there, tidy and irrefutable. Tomorrow, they would arrive at Riverlight Hall in gowns and suits, ready to toast to a future that no longer existed. And I would be here eating dinner alone but free. The thought didn't sting. It settled like clarity. Later that night, Evelyn texted me. How's the view from the high ground? I laughed under my breath and typed back, peaceful. I can almost hear the snow. Her reply came a moment later. You're calm in a way I envy. Calm is what's left after fire, I wrote. I left the phone on the table, the conversation unfinished, but understood. The next morning, Portland woke under sunlight so bright it looked foreign. I walked to the corner store for milk, passing rows of storefronts decorated with garlands and gold ribbons. Everyone around me looked hurried, distracted, chasing the illusion of holiday joy. I walked slower, invisible among them, and felt strangely untouchable. Back at home, I brewed another cup of coffee and sat by the window. The snow from the night before had melted, leaving slick reflections on the street below. My inbox pinged again, an update from the venue's automated system. Account status finalized, event cancelled, December 24. I stared at the date. Tomorrow. A soft smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. I spent the afternoon reading a book I'd never finished, the kind of slow domestic drama that mirrored my own life too much to enjoy before. Now it felt different, less personal, more distant. The main character was a woman who spent her life pleasing everyone until she finally walked away. I closed the book halfway through and whispered, "Good for her." By evening, the city lights blinked on, reflecting off the wet streets like tiny constellations. I sat on the couch, blanket draped over my knees, the hum of the heater filling the silence. My phone buzzed once more, another message from Sophie. Mom's furious. She said Harper's refusing entry tomorrow unless the bill is settled. What's going on? I didn't respond. I simply highlighted the message, took a screenshot, and filed it away. Outside wind brushed against the window. The city felt wrapped in something weightless and fragile. I thought of last Christmas, the chaos, the noise, the forced laughter. How I had stood by the kitchen counter unnoticed while they toasted to family. I had been there present, yet erased. This year, I had erased myself first. When I stood to refill my glass, my reflection caught in the window, steady, composed, unfamiliar in the best way. "They'll arrive tomorrow," I murmured to the glass, dressed in gold, and pretending they built the dream. "And they'll find the doors locked." The words didn't sound cruel. They sounded like balance. I turned off the lights and stood for a moment watching the city outside shimmer against the dark. Somewhere beyond the skyline, a ballroom sat empty, perfectly decorated, perfectly useless. Tomorrow night, they would face what I had carried alone. And when they did,